The night I caught my CEO climbing through my bedroom window,
Don't be angry.
I thought my life was about to end. There she was,
Rebecca.
halfway through the old wooden frame of my tiny apartment in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, her expensive silk blouse torn at the sleeve, and rain shining in her dark hair, looking nothing like the powerful woman who could silence an entire boardroom with a single glance. I stood frozen beside my kitchen table, holding a mug of coffee like it was a weapon. She looked around my nearly empty apartment, gave a nervous smile, and whispered, "Nothing to steal here." Then she looked directly at me and added, "How about you?" I should have laughed. I should have called the police. Instead, something in her eyes told me this wasn't a game. Before I tell you what happened next, if you believe kindness can change a person's life, and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. You never know when one small act of compassion might become the beginning of someone's second chance. My name is Nathan, and 6 months earlier, I had been working as a junior financial analyst at a company called Whitmore Holdings. My CEO was Rebecca Whitmore, a woman famous for turning struggling companies into profitable ones. She was brilliant, intimidating, and almost impossible to approach. I had spoken to her only twice, both times in crowded elevators, and both conversations lasted less than 30 seconds. To someone like Rebecca, I was invisible, at least. That's what I believed. I lived alone in a small apartment above a closed bakery, surviving on instant noodles, cheap coffee, and whatever money remained after helping my younger sister Grace with college expenses. My father had died years earlier. My mother lived in another state, and I had learned early that pride doesn't pay rent. Still, I worked hard because I believed someday things would get better. Then, one cold Friday evening, I discovered that Rebecca knew exactly who I was. She had called me into her office that afternoon and told me something that left my hands shaking. The company was restructuring, and my department was being cut. I was being laid off. I remember staring at the letter on her desk, thinking about Grace's tuition, the rent, the grocery bill sitting unpaid in my pocket. Rebecca watched me quietly, and for a moment her expression softened. She told me she was sorry. I nodded like a man who understood, but inside I was terrified. I walked home through the freezing rain carrying a cardboard box filled with the few things I'd kept at my desk. That night, I sat alone in my dark apartment and wondered how many more times life expected me to start over. 3 weeks later, I found Rebecca standing outside my apartment window. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then, she slipped through the window, nearly losing her balance, and landed on my wooden floor. She had no security detail, no driver, no expensive coat, nothing except a small leather bag and an expression I had never seen on her face before. Fear. She told me someone inside Whitmore Holdings had been stealing money through fake investment accounts, and she had discovered evidence pointing toward people close to her. The moment they realized she knew, her company car had been followed, her office had been searched, and someone had broken into her house. She couldn't trust the police because she suspected someone had influence there. She had remembered my apartment because I was the one employee who had once reported a suspicious transaction, without asking for recognition. She believed I was honest. So she came to me. I wanted to tell her she had chosen the wrong man. I was unemployed, exhausted, and living in an apartment where the heater barely worked. But when I looked at Rebecca, I didn't see the untouchable CEO anymore. I saw a woman who was frightened and alone. I gave her a towel, made her coffee, and let her sleep on my couch. That simple decision changed everything. Over the next 2 days, we worked together at my tiny kitchen table. She showed me encrypted financial records, and I noticed something nobody else had seen. The stolen money wasn't disappearing randomly. It was being transferred through a chain of shell companies connected to one of Whitmore's senior executives, a man named Jonathan. The deeper we looked, the worse it became. Rebecca realized Jonathan wasn't merely stealing from the company. He had been manipulating reports to make Rebecca appear responsible for the losses. If the scheme became public, she could lose everything. including her freedom. But the greatest surprise wasn't the conspiracy. It was what happened between us. Rebecca began telling me things she had never told anyone at work. She admitted she had built walls around herself after her husband, Michael, died from an illness several years earlier. She had thrown herself into business because working 12-hour days was easier than going home to an empty house. She had money, influence, and everything people thought represented success. Yet she confessed that she often ate dinner alone in a mansion that felt colder than my little apartment. I understood her, more than I expected. I told her about my father's death, how he had taught me that a man's worth wasn't measured by his paycheck, and how I had spent years believing I had failed, simply because I couldn't give my family the life I wanted. That night, Rebecca cried quietly at my kitchen table. I didn't try to fix her. I simply sat beside her. Sometimes people don't need answers. They just need someone willing to stay. The evidence eventually reached federal investigators, and Jonathan was arrested after trying to destroy the remaining records. Rebecca's name was cleared, but the experience changed her. She returned to Whitmore Holdings and made a decision nobody expected. She created a foundation for employees facing financial hardship, quietly using her own money to help workers with medical bills, tuition, and housing emergencies. Then she offered me a position leading it. I almost refused because I didn't want anyone thinking she had hired me because of what happened between us. But Rebecca smiled and reminded me that she hadn't chosen me because I needed saving. She chose me because I had saved someone when I had almost nothing left to give. Months later, she stood beside me at the opening of the Foundation's first community center. Children were running through the halls, families were receiving assistance, and Grace was starting her final year of college because her tuition had been covered by the Foundation. Rebecca looked at me and laughed about the night she climbed through my window. I laughed too, but then she became quiet and said that when she entered my apartment that night, she thought she was looking for a hiding place. Instead, she had found a home in the heart of someone who reminded her that trust was still possible. I realized then that sometimes life doesn't send people into our path to give us something. Sometimes it sends them to remind us of who we already are. Rebecca had entered my life as my CEO, a stranger standing on the other side of a window. She became my closest friend, my partner in rebuilding something bigger than either of us, and eventually the woman whose hand I held when the fear of being alone returned. So if this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes that kindness still matters, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need their own reminder that tomorrow can be different. And before the ending, I want to ask you something special. Comment, "I believe in second chances," if you believe one act of kindness can change a life. A year after that rainy night, Rebecca and I returned to my old apartment. The bakery downstairs had reopened, and the wooden window was still crooked from years of weather. We stood there remembering everything. She looked at me with the same smile she had worn that night and said, "You know, I still think there was something worth stealing in this apartment." I asked her what it was. She reached for my hand and whispered that it was hope. Then she reminded me that she hadn't stolen it. I had given it to her. And somehow, in giving it away, I had found my own.